Inside the Birds is back. What's going on, everybody? It is Geoff Mosher, and we got a pinch hitter today. We got Andrew DiCecco pinch hitting for Adam Kaplan. So it's Geoff Mosher, Andrew DiCecco here for an Inside the Birds presentation, presented, of course, by our friends at Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City. It is the exclusive Jersey Shore resort of Inside the Birds, and this is a momentous time because finally the NFL schedule, the Eagles schedule is out. We're going to take you inside the schedule, go through some of the compelling pockets of the schedule and some of the matchups. I'll give you some intel on what we have on that. And we're also with Andrew DiCecco here. He recently did his 53-man roster projection, a little bit different in a good way than the one that Adam and I did on the podcast in a recent week. So we're going to compare and contrast a little bit as well with Andrew and go through his projection, where it differs, and call it a podcast. You excited? You ready, Andrew? Are you happy the schedule has finally dropped and your life can go on now?
I am always fired up anytime you and I have the opportunity to talk Eagles football. I've just spent 90 minutes talking about the schedule, and I spent way too much time going over that 53. I'm very meticulous in how I do it, so I'm definitely looking forward to diving in and talking about it more.
So it's funny because Andrew, for our listeners, just had the I'll call it a unique experience that I have done in my career. And Andrew was on 97.5 The Fanatic Wednesday night with host Bill Colarulo doing
Yeah.
an NFL Eagles schedule show. Now, I get as excited about the schedule, I guess, as the next person, just because it's finally out. But I was in that chair when I was working at the Fanatic more often, and I've had to do the schedule show. And no matter how excited I was, there was not a moment where I didn't think, I can't believe we're doing a show about a schedule. Like, can you imagine if we did a Phillies schedule show? Oh, well, they got this 3-game series against the Brewers in August, Andrew.
Wow.
What do you think about that? No. Like, I mean, I get that the NFL schedule, Andrew, is unique. There's only 17 games, and we're gonna get inside it in this episode here. But how long was the show that you did with Bill?
90 minutes, but it also had
90 minutes.
we had like we had three-minute breaks, so that
Okay.
was built in.
So in total, it wasn't a full 90. It was only about 81 or 82 minutes of
And then
talking
I guess
about the
the
schedule.
last 5 to 7 minutes we were talking about different a player on offense that needs to have a good season, for the Eagles to have success, and then defensively, who's that one guy that you're looking to?
Right.
So we found ways to kind of stretch it out and talk about another topic while also making sure we went through all the games.
Yeah. You have to fold in actual football conversation when you're doing a schedule show, no doubt about it. But just the idea of doing a show about a schedule that, by the way, everybody already knows the opponent. You're just literally wondering what week you're playing that opponent, and what time you're playing that opponent gets so much fanfare. It's kind of
Logistically,
crazy.
yeah,
Yeah,
logistically is the only point of intrigue for me
exactly. A schedule.
in terms of our coverage and how we're going, where I'm traveling, where I'm going, and everything.
Yeah. Can you imagine inside the Sixers? We're going to do the Philadelphia 76ers 2024-25 schedule. Oh man, you got to wonder if there's load management going on this, October 25th game against the Warriors. Do they play
Yeah,
everybody?
yeah. Game 39. Where are you at on them?
Where's the tough part of that 82 game schedule? Good stuff. All right, Andrew, you got a lot of good stuff on InsideTheBirds.com lately. Of course, you've had a story recently where you discussed 3 dark horses to make the Eagles roster. And I like this idea because this was an idea that you kind of came up with first on social media. You put it out on X. I am now starting to get used to just calling it X. You posted it on X where you asked fans, right, your followers, who they were most interested in making the 53 among the UDFA class, and then you wrote about it. So I encourage everybody to go check that out, and you'll have more good stuff, and including your 53-man roster projection that is up on the cover page on InsideTheBirds.com as well. On Wednesday night, Andrew, we had your name actually came up. We had a great Adam Kaplan and I had a great Ask ITB live stream with our Patreon community. Our good follower and friend Carl noted your story on the UDFA's dark horses to make the roster.
Oh,
A
cool.
lot of people liked it. So and they're always looking forward to your work. So that was fun. Adam
Well,
does
I'm
his
gonna look
chat.
to do I'm gonna look to do more of that, Jeff. Sometimes I want to hear from I like to hear from a lot of the supporters of my work over the years and hear where they're maybe it's a position battle, right? Or maybe it's a dark horse or things like that. Because as you know, May and June is the equivalent of the dead zone in terms of covering the NFL, particularly the Eagles.
Mm.
So maybe trying to find different ways to engage, see where a lot of folks are at, and then being able to write that up and expand on what I know or my perspective on that is something I might look to implement a little bit more.
This is why you're a part of the Inside the Birds family and platform, is because we don't have to spoon feed you, Andrew. You are such a go-getter and determined, and here you come up with oftentimes your own content ideas. So that has been a great addition to our platform. And then we're also going to look to get you involved for our Patreon members as well. Again, you got to get in on patreon.com/inside the birds if you want the bonus content, the extra podcast. We had a great interview with Toledo's cornerbacks coach about Quinyon Mitchell recently, Corey Parker. That was fantastic. Adam does his chats on the Discord channel that you get when you sign up with Patreon. And we've been posting transcripts from the coordinators along with contract. As soon as we get all the contracts, we post them on our Patreon channel as well. So everybody should check that out. And again, to get in, patreon.com/inside the birds. All right, so we're going to now not spend 90 minutes going through the Eagles schedule, but we are going to look at the Eagles schedule and discuss some of the things that jump out and some of the intel we have. Andrew, when you look at this schedule, the first thing we know is you just never know. The injuries come into a factor. Some teams regress, you don't see it. Some teams, uh, improve, you don't see it. I'm sure nobody knew what to make of the Eagles last year. I mean, they were like a juggernaut for 11 weeks, and then they were literally the worst team in football over the last 6 weeks of the season. So you just never know what you're going to get from that regard. But when you look at this schedule, just give me like your overview that pops into your head. What do you think about it?
Well, there's not a lot of primetime games, which I was really shocked about. And sort of running through it, the way I have it mapped out, Jeff, is I think they're actually going to finish strong this year, which is the polar opposite of course, of what happened last year. And I think early in the season is where there's going to be some potential hiccups. Obviously, playing in Brazil throws a lot of things off, but then you're also traveling to New Orleans to play the Saints. You're traveling back to Tampa Bay to take on the team that knocked you out of the playoffs, all in in a span of just a few short weeks. So, and when you have two new coordinators that are really trying to assess and maximize its personnel, it's not really until after that September play, which is pretty much the equivalent of preseason play for veterans, that you're really starting to hit your stride. So I think that might be where the little bit of a bugaboo is in the early part of the season.
So when you say you think they can finish strong, is that predicated on the fact that I think three of their final four games are at or four of their last five games, right? I think are at the link.
Yeah, they got the divisional games and then the Steelers 425 game,
Mm-hmm.
which the Steelers are actually they're on the road, I think, for 3 weeks, but 3 weeks no, they're playing the Chargers cross country and then coming to Philadelphia to play the Eagles. So I
Wow.
think that impacted my decision. I have them winning that game as well. And just having two veteran coaches like Vic Fangio and Kellen Moore, I think they're going to have those guys focused. They know what to look for. They know how to prepare players moving towards the postseason. So I don't know that you're going to see that skid or they're going to drop a game where they should win. I don't think that's going to happen if
Yeah.
everybody stays healthy.
Yeah. Well, it's hard because it's 4 out of 5 at home, but it's not necessarily like four cupcakes. I mean,
Right.
you start off with the Panthers, right? In December 8th, Carolina Panthers, week 14. Obviously, as we sit here today, it feels like that's a game that they should win, even if the Panthers are improved. The Steelers game, you make a great point about how they have to go out west to the Chargers the week before. The history of the Eagles Steelers series is the home team usually win over the last 10 years at least or longer is the home team actually usually wins by a pretty heavy margin. When the Steelers come here, they usually lose pretty badly. When the Eagles go to Pittsburgh, the Eagles usually lose pretty badly. I don't know if that's going to hold true, but it's not a cupcake. That even because history really doesn't determine what's going to happen tomorrow in the NFL. So that's a tough game. The Commanders to me are a little bit of a wild card, and I'll explain why in a minute more. But it's a division game, and it crazy, And Andrew, if you think about last year, the Eagles went 4-0, right, against the Commanders and against the Giants, and three of those games fans said felt like a loss, right? Like
Right.
no, it almost felt like that in three of those games you were disappointed if you're an Eagles fan by how those games ended. Washington was, especially that first game, right, where Dotson catches the touchdown on fourth down to tie it
Yeah.
before Elliott kicks the long one in to win it overtime. But everybody was mad that there was no pressure on that last play. But if you even think that Washington will be slightly improved, and New York slightly improved, it sort of makes you wonder, can they go 4-0 against New York and Washington again this coming season? The pocket that jumps out to me, Andrew, is, and this is where I start to talk about Washington again, right? We first of all, it's not a
Rams,
kick.
Ravens.
Yeah, well, I want to start with really week 8. All right, week 8 Bengals. You're at the Bengals. The Bengals were 9-8 last year without Joe Burrow. I think the Bengals are a pretty good team. They've got some discord going on right now. We know that T. Higgins he asked for a trade, then he doesn't. Then he asked for a trade, then he doesn't. And then recently Trey Hendrickson basically said he wanted out as well. I mean, that's their second best receiver and their best pass rusher. So you do wonder internally what's going on there. But when Joe Burrow plays, they're a very good team. So it's not a cakewalk team. So you go Bengals, Jaguars at home in the primetime game. Jaguars are legit. I mean, we'll see what happens. I don't see the bottom falling out. Cowboys are always tough. Commanders, Rams, Ravens. So that's 6 games, right? You look at those 6 and you say, well, the Commanders are in there. If my point is, if Jaden Daniels is decent, he doesn't have to be great. I'm not saying if he's CJ Stroud. I'm just saying if he's better than what Bryce Young was last year, right? If he has a nice rookie year, you can see Washington being better than they were last year. They've got 2 good receivers for him to work with. They've addressed the offensive line. They signed the center from Dallas, Biadasz, right? They've drafted some really good players. Like they've addressed that team. If they're a decent team and they already give the Eagles problems when they're not, then that to me is a pretty tough 6-game stretch that ends with at Rams, who I might be higher on the Rams the most, but I think when Matthew Stafford's healthy, that's a really good team, and they showed it last year. And then at Ravens, that part of the middle kind of jumps out at me.
Yeah, to your point about the Commanders, Sam Howell had a way of making the Eagles secondary look really silly, but he'd also been in the league a little bit. He's had some experience. Whereas Jaden Daniels, that's where it comes down to it for me. I think a savvy coordinator like Vic Fangio is going to probably have him on his heels for much of the afternoon, being able to send unique looks that he probably hasn't seen before. So that's where I think could be the game within the game there. So, but to your point about the Rams, I think, yeah, I'm with you. I mean, that's if you look at some of their offseason additions on the offensive line,
Mm-hmm.
I think that they've done some good things to add to their defense. They have Cam Curl. They added Ernest Jones has been there, but I really like him. And remember that first half of the game last season, they gave the Eagles a lot of trouble. Mario Goodrich, Eli Ricks, then they put Roby at nickel. But then in the second half, Sean Desai sort of coached his way out of it. But I think that they've added some pieces there where that could be a problem. The Ravens is a game where I could see the Eagles going in there and actually winning. I think it's so hard to forecast something that far out, but I think that certainly is doable.
Sure. I mean, there really isn't a team. I think the Eagles, with what they've done this offseason, there's not a team on the schedule where you say that's an unwinnable game. But there's also only 2 games to me, 2 or 3 games on the schedule where you say, barring some miracle, the Eagles win and don't win that game. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
Bengals is one that I think that they're going to lose. I mean, going out to Cincinnati, 425 game, 2 primetime receivers, and a pretty good defense. I think that's a tough challenge for any team.
Yeah.
Let alone one that could be reeling at that point, going out there.
Yeah, I mean, like to me, like the obvious ones where you expect the Panthers to be better, you think, but I still think you have to just look and say the Eagles should beat that team. They should beat the Giants at least once, even with Daniel Jones being there, and then one of these two, the Saints or the Bucks. Like the Bucks, I don't know if they're going to be as good as they were last year. They lost their offensive coordinator. He seemed to be the guy, Dave Canales, who could unlock Baker Mayfield. We'll have to see if whoever their offensive coordinator now is, I forget already.
Oh, Liam Cohen from the
Liam Cohen,
University of
who I actually
Kentucky.
really like Liam Cohen,
Yeah, me
but
too.
we'll have to see if he can do the same thing there. I don't know. And if not, if Bucks are good because they do have talent, the Saints don't exactly scare you. They're not, they're not wowing you with a whole lot of talent across the board. So that's where you're at. But everybody else, Andrew, I mean, like the Cleveland Browns were a playoff team last year. The Jaguars are certainly a team with Trevor Lawrence that could be decent. We talked about the Ravens. We talked about the Rams. Steelers are always a tough team. They're always in it. The Cowboys always give them problems. Washington gives them problems whether they're bad or not.
What
So
about the
like,
Browns? Where do you land on the Browns this
yeah,
year, Jeff?
so that's one of those teams that it wouldn't surprise me if they took a step back. They made the playoffs last year. They had a magical run with Joe Flacco, but I'm not gonna act like they don't have talent. They do have a decent amount of talent. We'll see if Nick Chubb can come back healthy, right? We'll see if Deshaun Watson comes back healthy. They don't have Joe Flacco to save them this year because he's in Indianapolis now. But they obviously have Miles Garrett. He was Defensive Player of the Year. Um, so it's not to me.
Their
It's not an
secondary is
easy game.
phenomenal.
They have a
They've
very
done
good
a really
secondary.
good job of piecing together a lot of young talent. Greg
Yeah,
Newsome, Grant Delpit, Denzel Ward.
yeah,
You know,
yeah. So it's not a cakewalk. Again, they could be not as good as last year, but still be good enough to beat the Eagles on that day. I don't know, but yeah, I don't throw them in the cupcake category, but I don't also put them in that this is part of a tough stretch category because you could do that. I mean, you could. Nah, I mean they kind of fall in a weird spot. Saints, Bucks, then the Browns and the
yeah.
Giants.
I mean, for what it's worth, I have them winning week 6, winning week 7 in a big way against the Giants, and then we mentioned week 8 going to Cincinnati, and
Mhm.
that's a tough one.
Well, one area that we really haven't discussed, and this could sort of, because you know how things are in Philadelphia, especially if the team isn't winning, and especially with all the newness. But you open up the season, Packers in Brazil, and then an Atlanta Falcons team that with Kirk Cousins should really give Tampa Bay a run for that NFC South. I'm not saying that they're going to be great, but I think when you put Kirk Cousins with those weapons that they already have, they've got to get better defensively, but they certainly have added bodies on defense over the last few years. They drafted, I believe, defensively, right?
They added
That
Darnell Mooney and Rondell Moore, and
right. Like I mean, I'm again, that's not two easy games to start off with. And by the way, Kirk Cousins is it now death taxes and the Eagles get Kirk Cousins on week 2 in prime time? Because this will be the third straight year that they're playing Kirk Cousins week 2 prime time. That's
yeah.
really weird.
I'm also, I know that he gets a lot of grief for his prime time, lapses, and rightfully so. But I want to see what he does with offensive coordinator Zach Robinson, who comes over from the Rams, who's their passing game coordinator. If he's able to maximize the weapons there, I mean, look, you have Drake London, you have Darnell Mooney, Rondell Moore, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson. I mean, you should be able to sustain some sort of offensive production.
Yep.
So we'll have to see though. I mean that's a team that really underwhelmed last season. I thought that was a dark horse of mine to make some headway in their division. Never really materialized.
Yeah. I think that it's not probable or likely that they start off 0-2, but it's possible. I mean, these are two good teams, and we really don't know what the Eagles are. 2 years ago, the Eagles had such a great roster, and it was pretty early on. You could tell that they were headed to be really, really good. Last year, roster, especially on defense, not nearly as good, and then the injuries really, really hurt them. This year, with their additions, there's reasons to be optimistic in some areas. There's depth concerns in others. We'll talk about that under 53. But I would say, like, I don't go in thinking that this is a lock 13 win team like 2 years ago. And this schedule is not a cupcake schedule. like 2 years ago. It's got some legit teams on it. So again, I don't think they're going to start off 0-2, but they are playing two teams that I don't just give them the rubber stamp benefit of the doubt and saying, yeah, they're definitely starting 2-0. So you know how things are in Philadelphia. If they were to start off 0-2, or even win the first game against the Packers, then lose to the Falcons and be 1-1, I think it'd be pretty sour. Yeah, I don't think people are going to be really thrilled with that, but
Well,
that's the
could you
reality of the
imagine?
situation.
Could you imagine getting to that week 5 bye, the amount of calls or the amount of just questions and everyone's going to get about Nick Sirianni and where he's going to,
Mm,
the seat's going to get warmer and warmer if you get off to a slow start. I don't anticipate it. I think they probably split the first 2 games, but
hmm
I'm just you could certainly see a pathway where that could happen.
Oh, they better be 3-1. No worse than 3-1 going into that bye. Because if it's 2-2, you're right. That's going to be a very, very ugly, ugly bye week. Going into it. All right. Last thing on the schedule is what do you make of the Eagles not being in any holiday games, right? And only 5 primetime games, which is still a decent number, but some of that is they're automatically, by being Philadelphia in a big market, are going to get 3 to 4. So only 5, no holiday games. Do you think that says something about how the NFL is viewing them this year, the same way we're talking about? Like they just don't know what to do with it. Could be really good, maybe not.
Well, I like that there's no holiday games
Oh,
this
wow,
year
I
for
love
the
it. Yeah,
Eagles
I'm with you on that.
for coverage purposes. But I would also say they may fall within that category where they don't really know what to do with them. But I also think that they've had a lot of opportunities in primetime games. That's really been their MO of the past couple of seasons. But there's been a number of other upstart teams, the Texans, right? You have the Chiefs that are always at the top, the Ravens. So there's a lot of intriguing teams. And when you have a lot of them at the top, it's kind of hard to configure how you're going to disperse it. The Packers is another one, another team that I really like going into this season. So I think
Mhm.
that all that kind of is baked into the fact that the Eagles don't have as many as we've grown accustomed to seeing.
Should be fun. That is the schedule. Um, I thought that they would probably get the Eagles because of the moves the Eagles made. They brought in some splashy names, right? I mean, you bring in Saquon Barkley, you steal him from the Giants, another big market team. CJ Gardner Johnson is a guy who's always in the news for usually yapping at somebody, but he's always in the news, right? So, and plus they already have Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown, Devontae Smith. Um, but it seems so. I thought that they would probably be, a little bit more marquee in the holiday games. But like you said, I'm glad they're not. I don't mind it at all. And that's overall. I think we'll know a lot about the Eagle. You mentioned the bye week being week 5, and it gives us a chance after 4 games to see what they're at, like out of the first quarter. But I think we'll really know who they are in that stretch between week 8 and week 13. Week 8 Bengals, and then ends 13 at the Ravens. That will to be tell the story of their season. If they're really struggling and they're not what you expected them to be, then you might wonder, right, about those last 5 games and the home games. Like, yeah, it's great. They might win those games, but if we're talking about just winning to make a playoff spot, a 6 or 7 seed, that's not really going to be what the fans were expecting out of the year or even the organization itself. If they come out of that stretch and they're in the lead of the division by a game or two, they're neck and neck with Dallas or whatever, then you're like, okay, this is good. They've won, they've positioned themselves pretty well to enter that stretch and finish it off and not implode like the year before.
No, I agree. And it's also important to note how they win because we saw last season they won plenty early on in the season, but it never felt like a team that was channeling that 2022 Super Bowl destiny type of team.
Right.
You want to be able to see if they're for real and if they're able to work through some of these challenges. How are you going to fare in some of these closely contested games? That's really what I'm looking to see. They have a couple of veteran coordinators I think are going to play a really big role in the direction of this team, whether it's in the right direction or not. I think it's going to be in the right direction, so we'll have to see.
Yeah, we will have to see. All right, good stuff there. I haven't seen it yet, but I heard the Chiefs have a really tough schedule, and let me tell you something. I am really, really upset. I feel so much empathy for the 2-time Super Bowl champs having a tough schedule. Like I don't know how the NFL is so unfair to them. I'm
Oh
playing
man,
the world's
poor Chiefs.
smallest violin right now for the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Small violin for them.
all right, let's get into your 53-man roster projection first. We're going to stop and pause and hear a word from our great friends at Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City.
Go to get your game on. Go for the beers. Go for the cheers. Go for the hit and the hits. Go for the stakes and the stakes. Go to get your parlay on. Go to get your party on. Go for the scene. Go for the screens. Go for the gallery. Go for the win. Go to Ocean. Visit theoceanac.com to plan your visit.
All right, Andrew, you have done your 53-man, your what we call your way too early, our way too early 53-man roster projection. We all know that the real one is the one that comes out right toward the end of camp before the final cuts. And I believe you are the reigning beat reporter champion on the
This is
projection
true.
front. Okay.
This is true. It's not a title I take lightly.
Oh, I
And
know
as you
that.
and as you saw, I'm very meticulous in how I do it. So I explain my rationale in great detail of why I go a certain way. So I'm looking forward to expanding on that now.
Yeah, just so our great listeners know, Andrew says I'm going to do my, the too early 53-man roster projection right before OTAs. And I said, great. We do that every year. Good job. He sends it to me at 11:30 at night. I'm a little groggy. And I'm expecting you list your names, right? And then maybe like a sentence.
Not me, man.
Instead, you gave me War and Peace on every position, which is great, by the way. I'm just, the jilted guy who's trying to go to sleep, and got a 5,000 words to edit, but it was great, and I'm glad that you explain in great detail why you make these decisions. So let's get right into it. You in your offense kept three running backs. You kept Saquon Barkley, obviously. You keep Kenny Gainwell and Will Shipley. When Adam and I did ours, we kept a fourth running back, if I'm not mistaken. I believe we also kept Tyrion Davis Price. Our rationale was that Saquon Barkley's injury history is pretty intense, and you wouldn't want to leave yourself with just Kenny Gainwell and Will Shipley, a rookie, as your main ball carriers. But you seem to be okay with that. Or go ahead, explain.
Well, I think either a Ty Davis Price or a Lou Nichols or a Kendall Milton, the undrafted free agent from Georgia, one of those guys would have to be awfully special to be able to stick as a fourth running back on a roster that is really crammed right now as I was sort of assessing it. And I think you could get one of those guys on the practice squad, a Ty Davis Price, a Milton, whomever. That happens all the time. Really, only 40 guys get claimed off waivers on average every year. So I don't know that that's a position you would want to go heavy.
So what you just did was use logic, rationale, and sensibility to explain why there's no reason to keep four running backs. But the weird thing is you chose to exercise all this logic, rationale, and sensibility a year after the Eagles kept four running backs and never freaking used the fourth running back.
There you go. And this year it's a lot different when you're sort of trying to piece it together and you're like, running back would not be the position I'm going heavy. Tight end would not be a position I'm going heavier. Cornerback, maybe edge rusher is where you can really make a case for it, but certainly not running back at a player who you could probably get through waivers and stash safely on the practice squad.
Okay. All right. So what you're basically saying is you think the Eagles learned from last year's mistakes.
Yeah, I think that when
Yeah.
every roster spot is so precious, I don't know that you want to just waste it on somebody who's going to get a handful of carries sparingly. I mean, Boston Scott, he was a solid Eagle. It's 6 years he was here, I believe. But I mean, I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know that you couldn't have put him on the practice squad and somebody wouldn't have signed.
I don't know that you couldn't have done the same with Rashad Penny.
Rashad Penny, Trey Sermon the year before that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, listen, so I think your logic and rationale is a little more sound than what the Eagles had going on last year. I still to this day, usually Adam and I and even yourself are pretty good at getting an explanation or an understanding of an unconventional move that the Eagles make. To this day, we still can't. There's nobody who's been able to articulate an understandable reason why Rashad Penny was on the team all last year, despite barely being.
I still
It's
have no answer.
mind-boggling.
But I will say I did get clarity, and if you remember, I had 7 defensive tackles making the 53 last year,
You
including
did.
Octavius Street, which he did. So sometimes there's unconventional thinking, but you can at least hear some sort of logic.
Sure.
That's an area where the team historically will go heavy if they're going to go heavy somewhere. So as we move forward here, we'll see where a place might make sense to go that route.
Yeah. All right. So wide receivers became a real sore spot on your 53-man roster for some big fans of Florida State's Johnny Wilson, because you left him off of your group. I mean, your group was pretty straightforward. It was the two big guns, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, the rookie 5th rounder, Aeneas Smith. So that's 3. You kept, I believe, Paris Campbell. You chose one. I think you did the same thing me and Adam did. One of these two was going to make it. You went with Paris Campbell because of his connection to Nick Sirianni in Indianapolis. And then you went, I believe, Britton Covey because he's a punt returner as your 5th, where we were looking at other options saying maybe this is the year, they just don't have a guy who's only returning punts, but can do some other things as well. You had Covey, you left off Johnny Wilson, and you pissed off the entire Johnny Wilson fan club in doing so. I think your rationale is sound on this.
Okay, so Johnny Wilson, 6'6", good catch radius, very intriguing prospect. Hasn't taken a snap yet, so one way or the other, it's hard to be able to argue one way or the other logically. But just looking at special teams, if you're the 5th or 6th receiver, that's a prerequisite. You have to be able to do that. He doesn't have the body type nor the experience. We'll have to see if they work him into that capacity. But do you have the ability to afford the luxury of stashing a guy as your 6th receiver who isn't going to contribute on special teams? Or can your 6th round pick safely clear waivers and you develop him? He gets a little bit stronger and adjusts to the speed of the NFL game on the practice squad. We've seen that countless times before. Not necessarily sure why it was a shock to anyone's system, but a lot of folks were expecting to see Britton Covey off the roster. Britton Covey is one of the best punt returners in the NFL. They have a lot of guys who can do it, but they haven't done it in an NFL game. So I said, see the 2007 Eagles, which if anyone doesn't remember, they threw Greg Lewis back there, fumbled, J.R. Reed fumbled. They had to sign Rito Mahe back, tried and true, because he was secure in handling the football. So and if you listen to Michael Clay speak, he was asked directly about Britton Covey. I asked him about him plenty last year. The team loves him, and I think he has something to offer offensively. That won't be his calling card, but I think that there's a trust level there, and you don't want to disrupt continuity. He's my 5th receiver.
Yeah, listen, I think, again, it makes a lot of sense. You're going to get a lot of the reaction that I love. It just, I crack up inside when I see the reaction. Well, you can't cut him because if you cut him and try to put him on your 53, somebody's going to claim him off waivers, which is like mind-boggling. First of all, it's a wide receiver. Everybody got 2 or 3 wide receivers in camp that they love, right? Secondly, he went in the 6th round, correct?
6th round.
Yeah. So at a time when everybody has unlimited roster space, right? Because you can have a billion guys, he still was there in the 6th round. Nobody drafts him until the 6th round. But now we're to believe that if you waive him at the end of camp, another team is going to claim him off waivers, put him on their team, and then have to make a corresponding move and get rid of another player just to have Johnny Wilson on their team. And by the way, have the same situation where he's a reserve receiver who doesn't play special teams. Yeah, I don't know how he'll ever get through waivers if that's.
And by the way, as you know, more teams are inclined to keep their own players in-house.
Yes.
The Eagles made the exception of getting Alberto Quabenam, bringing him in on cutdown day, but you saw that he wasn't really able to make an impact. It's
right.
Not until later in the season where you're really grasping the offense. So do you really think a team's going to be willing to place a waiver claim on a player that has to get up to speed? You don't know how he fits. They're more inclined to keep one of their own who they release and they continue to develop. So I think that, look, every summer, whether it be Henry Josie or you go on down the line, there's always a player there. Like, you can't cut him. He's not going to clear waivers. Most of the time they do.
Man, that was low of you to go straight to the Henry Josie retort. That's not fair.
That was the first example. That was the first example that popped in my mind.
That's low hanging fruit.
Yeah. I wish I had a better example, but you know what I mean.
Oh, it's okay. I'm just messing around. Do you remember you remember the outside linebacker, 3-4 outside linebacker? McCoy was his last. I think it was like Chris
Chris
McCoy.
McCoy from Texas. Yeah, I
Yeah, you
remember.
remember he had like 17 tackles in his preseason finale, and everybody's like, "You can't cut this guy. You can't cut." Nobody. Not only did the Eagles waive him, I don't think anybody claimed him.
No, and in fact, to the Henry Josie point, he never played. He never got another NFL opportunity after averaging, I don't know, however many yards a carry he did.
Right.
So it just goes to show you teams know about the player. Sometimes they're not. The preseason play doesn't necessarily dictate um, interest or anything like that. So I think that for those concerned, first of all, it hasn't happened yet. He hasn't taken a snap, so maybe he lights the world on fire.
Mhm.
But I think that he could safely go through waivers.
All right, we'll see. Obviously, our opinions could change. He could light it up in the preseason games, and then you may have to worry a little bit about it, but we're far from
Sure.
that point. All right, let's go to the offensive line. I thought the offensive line was pretty, according to Hoyle here. You know, you kept 10, got your 5 starters, Becton 6, Hennessy 7, Darian Kennard 8. I believe we also.
Kennard was the one that I think maybe raised some eyebrows because
Mhm.
his signing went under the radar a little bit. He's a former 5th-round pick of the Kansas City Chiefs, but he can play right tackle and guard.
Yep.
So he's a little bit younger there, a little bit younger than, let's say, a Fred Johnson, who I had him pretty much swapped out for. And I think he might be an interesting reclamation project for Jeff Stoutland. I think they like him a little bit, and he's going to be given an opportunity. I think I like his versatility.
Yeah, no, we're with you. We've been talking about him a lot on Inside the Birds podcast, and I think we also kept him on our 53 for the same spot. And obviously Becton kind of bumps Fred Johnson, who was the backup left tackle there, because Becton can go right tackle, left tackle, and maybe even some guard. We'll see. So Becton, Matt Hennessy, Kennard are 6, 7, 8, and then the 2 rookies that they drafted, Trevor Keegan and Dylan McMahon. By the way, Dylan McMahon and was it Jeremiah Trotter Jr. signing their rookie deal. So the only people left to sign are Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. But I think this 10 pretty much jibed with our 10.
Yeah, the only one I was a little bit apprehensive about putting on my 53 was Dylan McMahon, but they like him. He's athletic. He can be your backup center if you need Matt Hennessy to play guard for you, because right now Matt Hennessy is the backup center.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll have to see. I mean, he strikes me as somebody that Jeff Stoutland's going to become enamored with due to his athletic traits and be unwilling to kind of part ways with. So obviously we're really early here, but I think that they would like to keep him if they could.
Yeah, we'll see. But yeah, definitely. There was no one who you didn't keep that I could look at here and say, what about this guy? Tight end, you went with 3: Goddard, CJ Uzama, and Albert. Go ahead, pronounce his last name. You do it better than
Albert Okwuegbunam.
Okwuegbunam, right. I think in ours, we decided to just go with 2, figuring you could get any of their options on the practice squad and be okay with it. And they have since released one of them, which was Noah Tungiai. But that wasn't one we were thinking would be. Uzama has to show that he's, through the injuries that set him back. He was pretty good with the Bengals, but not, with the Jets, he was not what they wanted him to be. This is a really fluid spot, and it wouldn't surprise me if more moves were made as we got deeper into camp, if the Eagles just weren't happy with the progress that Alberto is making, or with Uzama's health or anything like that.
Yeah, I forget where I made the comment that because I was asked what position or positions are the Eagles lightest in that could stand to use some more depth. And I said tight end. And I remember a lot of folks were, what do you mean tight end? They have this guy. Well, CJ Uzama's 31 years old, and he has 2 back-to-back seasons with knee injuries, right? So you're not necessarily sure how much he has left in the tank. Just explaining my logic here. And then third, Grant Calcaterra is somebody who the Eagles have given, who I shouldn't say they've given, he's been afforded multiple opportunities to have more of a prominent role offensively with Dallas Goedert missing time. Looking at last season, there's 3 games where Goddard missed. Calcaterra was inactive for one of those games, and then the other 2 games, he combined for 25 snaps, and that was sort of on the back of the season before, where he really wasn't able to make any headway. Mm-hmm. So I think the Eagles kind of know what he is right now. Now he does play special teams. Albert Okwuegbunam has not. Doesn't mean he can't, but I think the Eagles like Albert a little bit, Jeff. I think that bringing him back for a full offseason after he really didn't factor into the equation at all offensively last year tells you they want to get a longer look at him. He's more athletic, and I think they're going to swing on upside.
Yeah, the thing about Alberto, Andrew, is I'd love to see if he could block a little bit more, because he's got a big body. He's not a small guy for a guy who's kind of considered a stretch or flex tight end who can stretch the field. And if he could block a little bit, then you can almost envision him as the ideal backup, because then he could be in line just like Goddard. You can play him in line, you can play him flexed out, and that to me would give him a great opportunity along with the special teams to make the team. And then you're either not keeping three, or you are keeping Calcaterra, or you're keeping somebody else. Like, I don't know if you keep both Uzama and Alberto if Alberto shows you he can block, but um, we're far from there. That's what this camp is going to be all about. I agree with you that people sometimes confuse depth with bodies. They have a lot of bodies, but as far as like if Goddard's going to get hurt, you have really no idea whether Uzama, Calcaterra, or Alberto could step in and give what I mean. Well, you do know you none of them can give you what Dallas Goddard gives you, but you would not be comfortable running your offense the way you want to run it if any of those three had to be your starter for 3 or 4 games, which has happened before with Goddard missing time. So yeah, they've got bodies, but depth, I wouldn't say that is their strong point at this position.
Yeah, and when you're asked a question about where you could see the team looking to make an upgrade, I mean, in my opinion, and sort of combing through the roster, that's where I felt that they were lightest. You could also say defensive tackle, which is where we're headed. I mean, we're splitting hairs here. I think the roster is pretty well stocked, but when you're asked when you're asked the question, I think that those are the 2 spots that I was able to pinpoint.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so in total, you wind up keeping 24 players on offense, and then 3 specialists, the kicker, punter, long snapper. That gives you 27 total there before you get to defense, which means on defense, to make 53, you need to keep 26. So let's get through the 26 that you kept on defense in a second. First, we're going to pause to hear a word from our great friends at Sky Motor Cars.
Sky Motor Cars in Westchester is a different sort of dealership. All it takes is one look at their Highline pre-owned vehicles that people all over the country want and need. Owner Brett Schiller, make sure you don't spend a dime of your money before you purchase the car. Sky Motor Cars allows you to make all the decisions regarding your next vehicle. At Sky Motor Cars, you never have to spend more than necessary. Visit SkyMotorCars.com today or call 610-918-7225.
And if you stop into Sky Motor Cars out there in Westchester, PA, make sure you tell them Adam and Jeff and Andrew sent you. You will get a great deal. This is so, I'm still getting used to how we have to like divide up our defensive line between tackles, ends, and Sam or edge players. But, this is 2024, and we are doing the Fangio thing with the actual Vic Fangio. So defensive ends, where the Eagles are only keeping 2. It's got to be a record low for defensive ends. But
True defensive ends.
Yeah.
Josh Sweat, Brandon Graham.
Yep, that's what we had as well. And then obviously with your pass rushers, your edge rushers that we call your Sam linebacker or on the ball linebacker, the 3 names you kept were the ones that we did too: Bryce Huff, Nolan Smith, and Jalix Hunt. I don't think that this really probably caused you a whole lot of consternation. Now, Patrick Johnson has been able to make the team as the last edge / outside linebacker guy because he's been a vital part of special teams. In fact, if you remember, he pushed Janaris Robinson off the 53 last year when Robinson might have been a more natural pass rusher, right? But you've had an interesting note on Jalix Hunt, the 3rd round pick, who may not see the field much on defense, but he has a special teams pedigree, as head coach told you.
Yeah, and to your point, I kept other guys on that do fulfill that role on special teams, knowing that Patrick Johnson, if he's not there, that's sort of a void because he's a core member. But yeah, Jalix Hunt is someone who, when I spoke to his former head coach at Houston Christian, Braxton Harris, I asked him about it. I said, can he play special teams? Because everyone says, oh, he's going to be a redshirt guy. That may be true as a pass rusher, but I think he could factor prominently as a core guy based on athletic traits and fluidity and just his ability to run for Michael Clay as a special teamer. And Braxton Harris said that he was their best special teamer on the team. They said he kept looking up, making a tackle, making a tackle, making a tackle. Those are his exact words. So I think that he might be able to get in there early on as a factor.
Yeah. Yeah. So he can be a guy who can help you there. I will say this though. If you're a third round pick in the NFL and you're playing at Houston Christian University, you better be the best damn everything
Sure.
on the field. But the point more so is that he has the experience, he can do
And
it.
that he can do it. A lot of
Right.
guys, special teams isn't for everybody. It's a very physically demanding role. It's
Right.
a punishing role. It's taxing, and it's not very glamorous. So knowing that you could be a star pass rusher on your team and still be willing to be effective and willing to do that speaks volumes.
Yeah. All right. Going to the inside defensive tackle, we saw it synonymously on the inside. Obviously, your starting three, your big three are Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Milton Williams. And then your backup tank, you've got Marlon Tuipulotu, Moro Ojomo, Gabe Hall. So the name that I'm trying to think of who you didn't keep among
Thomas
that
Booker.
group. Thomas Booker, right? Which is, okay, Thomas Booker, right? Who was on the practice squad last year. I think we kept the same six, Adam and I. So let's just talk about the group as a whole, because I think Adam and I got killed on our Facebook community page because we said they're not as deep on the backups on the inside as they once were. I don't know how that's
They're
even
not.
arguable.
They're not
yeah.
as deep.
And
Look,
by the way, depth is important because Jordan Davis really needs to be able to play snaps, like long snap, like 34, way more than 35 to 40% of snaps, so that you're not relying on your depth, right? And same thing with Jalen Carter. He's got to be able to play more snaps too as a full-time starter.
the big three, Carter, Davis, and Milton Williams, phenomenal. You'd be hard pressed to find a better trio in the NFL. I
As
think
long
Milton
as
Williams,
Jordan Davis is playing like first month or half Jordan Davis, yes.
I feel like he will under Vic Fangio. I feel like he's going to be able to get the most out of Jordan.
Makes sense. Clint Hurt especially.
Clint Hurt, great example. So Milton Williams is somebody who's in a contract year. He's flashed on occasion. I think he's going to have a larger role this year. He really has to, given the depth. But Marlon Tuipulotu and Moro Ojomo, they're okay. They're sparingly contributing to the defense.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of know what you're going to get out of Marlon. Moro Ojomo is somebody that I'm sort of highlighting as somebody that I want to keep an eye on throughout the summer, because I expect some decent things. I want to see if he can take that sophomore leap. And then Gabe Hall rounds out the group at 6'6", 290, long arms. He was highly coveted after the draft. He came to Philadelphia for the opportunity because of scheme fit, as I was told. And I just think that he strikes me as somebody that's going to put a lot of good tape out there. And when teams are highly coveting young defensive linemen that can play any position along the defensive line, by the way, that might be a little bit of a risky proposition to try and sneak him through waivers.
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing that jumps out at me about this group is that it's an un-Eagles-like group in that the most veteran player on the inside here, with Fletcher Cox no longer on the team, is Milton Williams, fourth-year player. I mean, Jordan Davis is going to be a third-year player. Jalen Cox, second-year player. Marlon also, I guess Marlon and Milton are both fourth-year players, right? And then obviously Gabe Hall would be an undrafted rookie, and Ojomo second year. That's why, and I've said this, it wouldn't shock me, especially since they kept 7 D tackles last year, if they add a veteran here at some point before the start of the season, because it's important, especially if you have some young kids like Carter and Davis who either aren't fulfilling their expectation. I don't want to say they're not. Davis hasn't because of conditioning. Carter's been fine so far, but we know about the history of Georgia there. So it's going to be an everyday thing to make sure he's got his head on straight and is doing what he's supposed to do. And as we mentioned last podcast, I thought it was interesting that Vic Fangio singled him out when Vic Fangio was asked about him, the first thing he said was, as long as he's, in shape and he's got to be able to handle the workload. That was never even a question. So shows you right now already Fangio starting to assert himself, and Jalen Carter is not going to be babied by any stretch of the means. And it's year 2. So he's going to be asked to do what he did last year, but keep that pace up and not get complacent.
Yeah. And I went back and looked at a number of years prior to see, and it was with the exception of 2020, the Eagles have kept an undrafted free agent, at least one, on their initial 53. And for me, that guy is Gabe Hall. Another name to potentially keep an eye on would be offensive guard / tackle Gottlieb Aidze from Maryland, who is a player who I had tabbed as a midday 3 pick, very raw player. But I think that he's someone that if Stoutland's able to tap into his potential, he might be somebody that he becomes infatuated.
Gotcha. All right, moving on to linebacker. I like what you did here. You kept 5. We also kept 5, but our 5th, obviously the 4, Nakobe Dean, Devin White, Zach Baun, who we both use as an inside linebacker based on what Vic Fangio said, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., the draft pick. Our 5th was Oren Burks, a good veteran signing from the San Francisco program there, and he did a nice job when he was asked to fill in for injury purposes. You left him off. We kept him on. You put Ben Van Sumeren on. If you heard the podcast, I felt uneasy about not putting Ben Van Sumeren on. So your scenario here seems plausible to me that Burks doesn't make it, but probably winds up on the practice squad if they can get him. But I just don't know if he's got the ability to just. He is a linebacker. He is a backup. I don't want to be this guy who says, I don't know if you can get him through waivers. He did sign late. You could probably get him through waivers.
I think that you might see, and I by the way, I went back and I was listening to the podcast, and when you mentioned your take on Van Sumer, and I was nodding my head in agreement. Of course, you know that I think pretty highly of Ben, but because of that is why I have Oren Burks not making it. I think you may see a similar scenario of what happened with Nicholas Morrow last year, where you saw him placed safely on the practice squad and promoted in week 2. Because if you're on the roster for week 1 as a vested veteran, your contract's fully guaranteed. He's not owed, he doesn't have a ton that's owed to him in guaranteed money. But I think that's something that could play into it, and in exchange for keeping a young developmental player on the roster that may otherwise have some interest via the waiver wire.
Yeah, I mean, it's as we talked about, it's just not like the Eagles to have a guy who has the athletic traits that Ben Van Sumeren has, and you've already put a year into him, and you actually played him in a game, and were pleasantly surprised to then just not continue that development. And listen, could you also get Ben Van Sumeren through waivers? Maybe not, because he's younger and he's a really good athlete, and now he's got some pretty decent tape. So I wouldn't want to risk that, especially if he puts on even more good tape in the preseason. So I totally get where you're coming from, and it wouldn't surprise me if in August, when we're doing our real 53-man, or not our real ones, but the ones that go right before the season, if Van Sumeren is on our 53-man projection.
Yeah, just really athletic. I thought he really did some good things on special teams. In fact, when I asked Michael Clay just last week about certain players that he's looking for to step up and be leaders, that was the second part of my question. He mentioned, further down the line, he said it's going to take everyone, but then he went and singled out Josh Jobe, Ben Van Sumeren, and Sidney Brown. So I think if Michael Clay has his pick for a couple of guys that he's going to be championing for, I don't know this, but he's mentioned Josh Jobe plenty of times, and he's mentioned Ben Van Sumeren plenty of times, and I think that counts for something.
There you go. All right, we'll finish it off with the secondary. Now, at first glance, someone reading your story, their eyes might fall out of their head when they see that you're keeping 7 cornerbacks, but you're only keeping 3 safeties, which makes 10. That's still kind of heavy. I think last year they went with 9. I'd have to go back and look. 10 is heavy, but certainly justifiable with all the work that they put in to the secondary. And if you're going to consider Cooper DeJean and Tyler Hall sort of these hybrid players, you can play nickel and DeJean can play safety, then it's more like keeping 6 cornerbacks and maybe 5, right? And 5 and 2 nickels or and that, because you did not keep Avonte Maddox. We kept him, gave him the edge. Certainly wouldn't surprise me if he was beat out. Explain why you like Tyler Hall, though.
Well, first I want to explain why I have Avonte Maddox off, because I've gotten that question a few times today. Look, the Eagles signed Tyler Hall, and then they ended up releasing Avonte Maddox after, if my timeline's correct on that. And then they let Maddox out there on the free agent market for about a month. I think he got garnered a little bit of interest from the Saints, but he ended up having to settle back on a 1-year deal with the Eagles. So there wasn't a lot of interest in him. And I think he's somebody that, because of the injury history, you might be able to stash him on your practice squad as insurance. He can also play safety for you. But I think that if you keep him, it's going to be at the expense of a couple of the younger players. And I think they really like Tyler Hall. In fact, it's my understanding that they do. And if it's a true, fair competition, Tyler Hall is going to get a long look, and it wouldn't surprise me if he's able to settle in. And if you keep Tyler Hall, who actually his doubles as a kick returner. He was very efficient in that area at Wyoming. He had 31.7-yard average, and he returned 2 for a touchdown. But he's also a younger player who compiled a couple of good seasons with the Raiders. And if you have him in place as your nickel, I think Cooper DeJean is going to start the season at nickel. But it
Mm.
allows you, as he becomes more familiar with Vic Fangio, and Vic Fangio feels more comfortable in asking him to do more and move around, well, then you have Tyler Hall, who can confidently step right in and play nickel, and you're able to keep that young nucleus intact. That was my thought process there.
Yeah, and look, it makes sense. The Eagles would have then a couple of different options at nickel if they wanted, which is nice to have. They haven't. That certainly hurt them last year, right? When Avonte Maddox went down, they tried James Bradbury there, didn't work. They signed Bradley Roby off the scrap heap. He got hurt. Oh wait, Justin Evans was also he got hurt. Like they just did not have young, healthy optionality at that position. They have that now. We'll see how that competition shakes out. It should be a pretty legit competition. Like they may have in their mind who they want, but I think that nobody's so proven it. Like Cooper DeJean has to show he can do it, and obviously Avonte Maddox has to stay healthy. Tyler Hall has to come into a new defense that I'm not quite sure if what his experience is with the Fangio defense, but for a nickel corner, that is a totally different animal than some non-Fangio differences, especially with the match and carry and deliver.
Sure.
So to let everybody know the names, you kept Slay, Quinyon Mitchell, obviously Cooper DeJean, Keely Ringo, Eli Ricks, Tyler Hall, and you kept Josh Jobe as a 7th. We didn't. I know you're big on Jobe because they're big on him for his special teams ability, but you've also now kept a decent number of players who are also going to make an impact on special teams. So kind of an interesting decision there. I
Well,
mean, it's a crowded house.
well, Job and Van Sumeren are I'm looking to those guys to be the leaders. And if I'm Michael Clay, those are probably the 2 guys that I'm pounding the table for to make sure that you're able to keep them on, because I think that they have leadership ability, which he already alluded to. And look, Josh Jobe has gotten an unfair amount of flack, and a lot of folks don't think he can play. That's not true. He struggled last season. He sort of fell out of favor, but I don't know that he was really given an opportunity to reclaim it. Remember, he came out of camp as the top backup outside corner for a reason. He climbed from 5th all the way to, he took that Zach McPherson role. And I think that, yeah, he may not factor prominently defensively, but I think that he offers versatility at corner and potentially at safety, which is what I sort of thought when going through the draft process. But he's also one of the best gunners in the NFL and a player who is on the Pro Bowl ballot. So I think that has to be taken into consideration. And when you're looking at the final spots on the 53, it's not who's the best corner, because when you're factoring in the game day value, it comes down to special teams.
Right.
I would take Josh Jobe any day.
And this is an interesting cut list for you, because obviously guys that didn't make it are Avonte Maddox, as we just discussed, right? James Bradbury, who did not make our 53 as well. And yet he's still here on the roster, with the contract. So, but James Bradbury doesn't make it, and neither does Isaiah Rodgers, right? Who
That's another one I got a lot.
Everybody seems to be all gung ho about, but we didn't have him on our 53, and neither do you.
Yeah, that's somebody that, look, he hasn't played football in over a year, so that has to be taken into account. He's also, just based on his body type, they have a lot of outside corners, predominant outside corners. He's probably going to be asked to challenge for a nickel role, which he has played very sparingly in his career. And the Eagles like Tyler Hall, and Maddox is there, and they have Cooper DeJean's there. So all of a sudden it's a really crowded room, and you wonder how he fits into the puzzle.
Yeah.
He can return kicks. I know that, but so can Tyler Hall. So can Will Shipley.
Cooper DeJean.
Cooper DeJean.
Oh no, DeJean did punts actually.
Cooper's a punt guy. Anaya Smith can return kicks. Paris Campbell can return kicks. So that I don't know that would be the hiccup or the the reason why you keep him around. He's gonna have to earn his roster spot.
Absolutely. You know what? Come to think of it, we might have kept Isaiah and not Eli Ricks. I don't remember, but either way, that's
no. I think you kept Rodgers and didn't keep Joe.
That's right. That's what we kept, Rodgers and not Joe. Yeah, exactly. And then to finish it off in the secondary, you kept 3 safeties. I mean, it's really hard to make a case for a 4th, especially if you're going to consider Cooper DeJean as a potential safety type player. But CJ Gardner-Johnson, Reed Blankenship, and Sidney Brown. Now, the only thing that makes it difficult, and we had the same problem, is that you just don't know if Sidney Brown's going to be healthy to start the season. If he's not, they absolutely have to keep another safety, but that's for, a discussion for late August.
Yeah, and I'm not reporting anything, but I know that when I spoke to Sidney Brown in the locker room cleanout, he remarked that whatever the timeline was, he was anticipating on beating it. And you saw the videos on social media and things like that. I think by all accounts, I don't envision him personally being starting the season on the PUP list. I think he might be someone who maybe doesn't contribute week 1 or 2. Maybe he does, but I don't know that it's going to be a long period until you see him on the field factoring defensively for you.
Right.
And Cooper DeJean, like you mentioned, Jeff, could factor in as a safety. Keely Ringo was cross-trained last season briefly when the Eagles were really short on numbers at safety. And that's probably not going to be his home, but he can do it. That's my point. And Tyler Hall, it was sparingly, but he's played some safety too, as I understand it. So look, and Mekhi Garner is somebody who that I like. He might be able to make a roster push, but I think the versatility that they have there affords the Eagles a little bit of flexibility in going lighter in that area while they're waiting for Sidney Brown to return fully from injury.
Don't forget about your boy Tristan McCullum. He's out there. I mean, he can play.
I forgot about. How can I forget about my guy Tristan?
Yeah. He actually sort of like BVS, right, Ben? He got in and showed that he could hold his own a little bit in some NFL games there. So yeah, there's certainly a lot of names, and there's going to be tremendous competition there. All right, we're going to close. I have one burning question that I have to ask you before we get out of here, because your rookie diary last season with Eli Ricks was, a huge fan favorite, smash hit. Everybody loved it. Have you thought about who you might want to approach for this year's coming up rookie diary?
Jalen Hunt's the obvious choice for me because I've written about him a ton and I've reported on him, and he has an interesting story. But he's a 3rd round pick, so that's something that I'm like, maybe I want to go for a less obvious choice, which is why I didn't go that route last year with Sidney Brown or Nolan Smith, even 1st round. Gabe Hall potentially. I like to make it challenging, Jeff. I like to try and pinpoint right now a player that I think could make the roster, and then start to build up that diary and identify that person now.
And then that person's got to be compatible. He's got to be like, there every week like Eli was, and be able to give a little bit of himself like Eli did. I felt like Jalen Hunt would probably fit
I think Jalen Hunt's probably going to be my guy if he's up for it.
All right. If not, maybe I've been doing the
Johnny Wilson.
No. I was thinking maybe one of those linemen, because linemen are, if you can get them to talk, they usually say some really crazy stuff. So there's nothing more crazy in my lifetime than interviewing Michigan offensive linemen. Runyon literally would say anything, and he didn't care how anybody would interpret it. So in that regard, Trevor Keegan might be.
Maybe Anais Smith or Johnny Wilson.
Nia Smith would be good. Yeah, one of those two. But I'm thinking Keegan might give you some really good, like, blue collar Michigan, national champion lunch pail guy. Because he's like the old school lineman. Like McMahon is the new school undersized. I'm a Jason Kelsey clone. Kick out. Keegan's like, I just have to bowl guys over, right? That's the type of lineman you want to speak to. The mean, nasty mauler in the trenches kind of guy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Sean Stevens might be an interesting one for training camp.
Yes.
Obviously the undrafted corner who
can we get
profiled.
A training camp diary? Or are we thinking of also just doing a training camp diary?
I could. It's something that you and I could discuss, but it gives another angle to our coverage that I think we would be pretty interesting. We know his story pretty well now. I think he might be somebody that would be interesting to follow through camp. But right now for the season, I'm leaning towards Jalen Hunt.
All right, Jalen Hunt. I think everybody would really love to hear more about his story, and on a weekly basis. You knocked it out of the park once again, pinch hitter Andrew DiCecco. We really appreciate it. It's been a great time. That's going to do it for this episode of Inside the Birds, the leading podcast in Eagles intel. And as always, we thank you for flying with us inside the Birds. Be sure to check out our friends at phlsportsnation.com. They're enhancing the fans' experience with their coverage of all Philadelphia sports teams. For the fan, by the fan is their motto. So make sure you check them out at phlsportsnation.com. and on Twitter at PHL Sports Nation.